And welcome. Today we're going to be taking apart a Dell XPS 13, and this is the 7390. It's got a 10th gen Intel Core i5 and a 4K display. So to begin, we're going to need a small Torx bit. This is a T5, and then once we get into the internals, we'll need a small Phillips bit. So first thing we're going to do is flip it over and remove the screws. Alright, now once you have the screws out, the next part is a little bit tricky. You're going to separate the bottom case from the palm rest, and the little catches, little snaps that hold this on are extremely strong. So you first have to try to find a seam or get an opening to put the spudger, and then you have to work it all the way around little by little to pop it off. This is not a bottom case where you can get it started on a corner or a side and then just pull it the rest of the way off. It's made that way. And also be careful of the sharp edges on the bottom case when you are trying to work it off, because it will easily cut your finger. So after you've worked your way around, you can remove that bottom case, and you can definitely see the little tabs that catch in are pretty strong. So it's definitely takes some patience and some skill to be able to pop this all the way off. But just keep working on it and you should be able to get it off no problem. Alright, so as usual, the first thing we're going to do is remove that battery. Looks like it just has a simple connector, so we'll go ahead and remove those battery screws. And we're going to change our bit to a small Phillips. This is a 2.0. And for the connector, you just want to get a fingernail on each of this little tabs on the side of the connector and just work it back and forth until it comes out of the motherboard. Alright, so we're going to need to remove some tape. A lot of times this adhesive they use all over the motherboard will hide some screws, so it's definitely a good idea just to remove it. Alright, so it looks like for our SSD bracket it's just one screw, and we're just going to work it up and off. Interesting. So after you have that bracket released, the actual SSD is quite tiny. They're still using the full-size little cooling strip here, so you may need to just pry up a little bit on the SSD as you're trying to work it out, because this stuff is kind of tacky. It will hold it to where you can't actually slide it out, but if you work it, it will come out eventually. Okay, so it looks like we can go ahead and remove the fan and heatsink assembly. And to do that, we're going to need to disconnect both of the cooling fans and remove any kind of brackets or other stuff that is in the way. So go ahead and pop that little connector out and remove some more tape. Alright, so we'll take off that little bracket and the little, I believe this is the webcam cable, maybe the digitizer. And this type of connector just pops up and off. And then for our Wi-Fi antennas, it'll just pop up and off as well. Go ahead and get that second fan connector. Alright, so it looks like we're good to go ahead and start removing these screws for the fan and heatsink. So the screw mounts are numbered in case you are reinstalling the fan and heatsink. They're numbered in the order that you're supposed to tighten them, and that will help the thermal paste to be kind of tightened down and squeezed out evenly. But as far as removal, it doesn't matter. And looks like a little bit more tape over there. So once you have those screws out, you should be able to wiggle that fan and heatsink assembly free without any problem. Alright, I'll give it a quick inspection. So it looks like we're pretty close to being able to remove the motherboard. So we'll just go ahead and start removing any kind of ribbons or cables that are still plugged into the motherboard. So it looks like a few of the screws on here, Dell got kind of cute and made them quite a bit smaller. So I've switched to a 1.5, which still looks like it's a little bit big. Okay, returning back to the video cable screws, these are a 1.0 and they are on tight. Not a very good idea for Dell to do that, because if these screws get stripped out, good luck getting your video cable out, and you can't remove your motherboard or your display. So I had to press down really hard on these screws to get them to start coming out. So just keep in mind that your video cable bracket retainer screws might be super tight. And I don't like pressing down that hard because it is the motherboard, and there is a chance of damaging it if you are really put a lot of pressure downwards on that. But it seemed like it was okay, but just be advised that it's going to be easy to strip these out, just because Dell chose to tighten these things down like just an insane amount. Okay, so we finally got those off, and for some reason, for both of these video cables, Dell also put their stupid sticker over the little piece that you're supposed to be able to pull up on to remove it. So we're just going to try to use our fingernails to pop that video cable up and off. Usually this little strip of plastic up here turns into a loop, which will help you kind of pull it out. But again, for some reason Dell has decided to do a lot of different things on this laptop. Okay, so we have the screen assembly disconnected from the motherboard. So at this point we could also just separate the display assembly before we remove the motherboard. And I think I'm going to do it just because I did have to press really hard on these two screws, and if I have to do it again, it'll be easier to put the pressure downwards if the palm rest is laying flat on the table here instead of being on top of that display assembly. So I'm going to switch the bit yet again back to a 2.0 and remove a hinge screw from each side. Okay, so now we can go ahead and open up the assembly, and we're going to support it with our hand to remove the last 2 screws on each side. This will keep anything from breaking while you're pressing down to remove that screw. Alright, so while keeping it supported with your left hand, we can go ahead and separate the 2 pieces. Alright, so it looks like we can go ahead and finish removing the motherboard. So we're just going to remove some of these connectors. Some of these you just flip up on the little retainer and pull the ribbon out and then flip it back down. It's just a real thin little retainer door there. So we'll go along and just finish disconnecting anything that is still stuck to the motherboard. And then we can finish removing these screws. Alright, so we'll do one last check and just make sure that all of the visible ribbons have been removed. And then we'll just kind of wiggle the motherboard to make sure that nothing else is stuck to it that we've missed. So looks like we got everything, and we'll just gently turn that over, make sure there's nothing else stuck to it, and then that is it for the motherboard. And just keep in mind the RAM is not upgradable. There's the integrated RAM chips, and it doesn't look like they have an expansion slot. So if you want to try to upgrade your RAM on this, you're out of luck. Right, so it looks like we pretty much got everything. The keyboard, it's definitely removable. There's a lot of small Phillips head screws on there, so it looks like you'll just have to use a small Phillips to replace your keyboard, and same with the touchpad. There's just a few Phillips bits here at the top, and then that touchpad should come right out. But we're going to go ahead and leave those on the palm rest. And that is it for the palm rest assembly. Alright, so for the display assembly, if you want to attempt to try to replace the screen on this, you're going to need a heat gun and a brand new spudger and a lot of patience. These are pretty well adhered together, so it's definitely worth considering buying your display as a complete unit as opposed to trying to break this apart and fix it yourself, because it's a real pain to separate these displays, almost as bad as a MacBook. So definitely consider, if you have a broken screen, buying that display as a complete unit, because it's not really serviceable by the layperson. So that's how you disassemble a Dell XPS 13-7390. And if this video helped you or you found it informative, please like and subscribe. Thank you.